And we are back from our break. We have just basically opened these, gifts that Albert got us, and now we're talking about. Well, so we talked a lot about that. We've come to the end of the DLC season. We're eagerly waiting for the next one, right? I wanted to talk about sort of plans for the upcoming DLC season, and just sort of where do we go from here in terms of where we're at as players. The first thing I wanted to talk about was you mentioned earlier in this podcast the top 8. Or not top eight, the elimination rounds, the procedure for those. So Zan, you actually played in more of those than anyone else that I know personally. So why don't you talk about what happens in the elimination rounds of a DLC, and then we can get from Albert how much of that he sort of orchestrated, authored, how much of it was intentional, and how much of it was just a result of circumstance.
Yeah. So, day one ends, and the thing that you're looking forward to still on day one is getting the deck list of your opponents, right? We get a document that has the top 64's deck list, and you're gonna be in a bracket, and you're gonna know what you're gonna be playing against round one. So, the tournament is still not over even at the end of day one. You're like, let me go get dinner, and then I'm going to play test and figure out at least my first matchup of the next day. So from a player, that's what you're thinking about. So the day doesn't really end. You wake up early, you play some more games, try to get in a good headspace against what you're playing against. So then you show up to the tournament hall. Day 2 is starting, and what you're going to do is you're going to be, I'll just specifically talk about Vegas. They had us in a room with a bunch of tables. You have assigned seating. You sit in your assigned seating, and we're going to be handing over our decks that are organized to the judges, and you will not have access to your deck until you have been eliminated from the tournament. Of course, you're going to have it for playing against your opponent, but as soon as you're done playing against your opponent, if you won, you will put it into an evidence bag and return it to the judge. So there will not be any tampering. And I love that. The thing in that moment I want to be thinking about is just my opponent, what they're playing, and how I'm going to try and defeat that. And so it really made me feel at ease that my opponent couldn't manipulate their deck in some sort of way, that the judges had it, and that that's the only thing I needed to think about. It is, extremely, there's a high pressure environment. There's something in the air that makes you feel like the weight of the world is on you, because you're going on stage, and at this point, majority of the players are no longer in this main tournament, and everybody's counting the rounds and waiting for you to come tell them whether you won or you lost. And now the judges, there's a lot of judges. They are in the day one, you're surrounded by a lot of judges, but there are more people than there are judges.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, when you're playing in Top Cut, it feels the opposite. It feels like there's more judges than there are people. And if you haven't been in an environment like that, it's just tougher. It just feels like every small thing. Like, I remember in Vegas, I make it to the finals after round after round of just straight amazing players, right? And I'm going into the finals, and now I'm experiencing a lot of decision fatigue, and just staying up late, just using all of my mental energy I could possibly use, and I make a mistake, and I have to recalibrate on stage. It was like a Prince John strength situation where I needed to play the character before I played the strength, or I played the strength before I played the character. And so I could feel the air from the building leave when I saw that everybody saw me make this mistake on camera, because there was a theater type position, and that was devastating, right? And in that spot, I had to just say, I made a mistake. Now I can't go into a hole of mistakes. And there are 3 judges to my right, 2 judges to my left, a judge behind me, a judge in front of me. And this is embarrassing, but the judges had a straight face. No one is making a face like, what just happened? You know, like everybody's just straight faced, just doing their job. And, you know, I got to find my way out of that situation and win that tournament. But yeah.
So Albert, the way Zan feels, where it's, you know, he talked about it being sequestered, separate from everything, which I, as a spectator, was a little disappointed by because, as you know, I love to watch Zan's matches. You know, I'm usually standing right there. I've probably watched hundreds of his matches over time. I can't do it for the top 64. I'm sure you weighed the pros and cons of that. So illuminate me a little bit on the process of designing everything.
Yeah, so very early on, there was the conversation about, okay, if we're going to do this 2-game format, what should the schedule of the event be? Because when you're putting one of these events together, you start with the venue, okay? Okay, how many people can we fit? What size of tournament can we do? All right, now that you have the venue, how are you going to do a floor plan to accommodate that venue? And then it starts to go kind of hand in hand with the schedule. How many rounds are you going to have based on the number of people you have? How are you going to progress from one portion of the event to the other? How many days are you going to have? When are you going to do badge pickup? Which, if it were up to me and we were planning this well in advance, I would skip the badge pickup entirely. If you're planning far enough in advance and you sell the tickets far enough in advance, I'm mailing wristbands to every single ticket buyer. Like, done. So that we skip the whole thing process. But because of the, again, short time frames and 100 other things, that just wasn't going to work. So added to the list of examples where prior planning really matters a lot. But there was actually kind of a difference of opinion, and you know, forgive me because this is being relayed through Ravensburger, so I didn't talk to the Europeans directly, but based on the schedule, the structure that was ending up utilized is actually the one I recommended, which is the 9 rounds of Swiss and the top cut. What was relayed to me was that the Europeans actually wanted more rounds of Swiss and potentially a smaller top cut, because they wanted this kind of day 2 concept that exists in a lot of other TCGs. And I wasn't dead set against that, but just for scheduling reasons, I really wanted it to be like Swiss in one day, cut, go to top cut the next day, start it fresh. I thought that was really good. And then just for scheduling reasons, there, you know, having all that go for a certain period of time is big. Plus the transition from Swiss to top cut always takes some amount of, you know, modifying. Also, the other big thing that happened that I cared about a lot is, and one of the reasons I wanted this kind of clean cut from one day to the next of Swiss to top cut, given the 2-game format kind of doesn't narrow it down that well, I wanted to get to a wider top cut and get to a best of 3 elimination round as quickly as possible. So that was like the maximum thing. I wanted the maximum size top cut because I wanted to get to that level of tournament integrity as soon as I could. I also wanted to diminish the advantage that teams would have with scouting, with preparation and all that. So I wanted to have open deck lists published as far in advance as I could. I wanted people to know what their pairings were going to be in advance and who they were going to be playing and how that was going to go, because if I didn't release that information publicly, then I was running the risk that teams would be able to scout that information and only they would have it and their opponents would not, and that would exacerbate that advantage. So I was always very conscious of that part. And then beyond that, the entire Top Cut process was designed essentially to create as controlled an environment as possible. First of all, to isolate the amount of external factors that could affect the result, you know, and take away as much player autonomy in terms of things that aren't gameplay as possible. Like, players aren't going to think about what seat they're going to sit in. They're not going to be in control of that. They're not going to decide anything else. They're just going to focus on the gameplay. We're going to take out all the distractions, all the potential outside factors, including spectators, by the way, so that we could, you know, do that. Now, by the time we got to Vegas, we got it to the point where we could have this kind of external viewing area with the screen, which we always wanted to do, but we just never could do before that. And all of these things, the schedule, the top cut, all this stuff, very much it was not set in stone. And to talk about the stream thing for a second, originally in Atlanta, and this is one of those situations where I lost, but then they kind of reversed it. I got overruled, but it was changed. They actually did not want judges sitting on the stream tables, like managing the game, because they wanted it to be just like the same kind of conditions that were out on the floor. And I'm like, you know, me and George Machado from PPG, we look at each other, we're like, over under, how long is this going to last? I'm like, 2 hours. 2 hours for them to like see how it doesn't play out, and then maybe another couple hours for it to actually be like, okay, we got to fix this. So predictably, by the time the lunch break was done in Atlanta, we now had judges sitting on the tables because, you know, they're not the same conditions as out on the floor. You have a camera and potentially thousands of people watching you, and the people playing are going to know that. and they have to like manage a lore counter on the iPad and all that. Like it is different conditions. So the idea of trying to replicate that by having less judge involvement and not more was just a mistake. But it got corrected quickly, and that's good. It's good that people correct, miscues when they come up. But for the top cut thing, I always try to do it in a separate area, completely isolated, like room. And I didn't, and then we take possession of their decks. And then there's this comprehensive kind of courtesy deck check that occurs right at the beginning. And that's to avoid so many issues. It's more about problem prevention than problem solving, because problem solving gets a lot of credit and it's great. But if you can get away with it, problem prevention is so much better.
Right.
And it happens quietly and all that. I've had, and that comes from experience. I've had situations where during the top 8, I think I was judging Yu-Gi-Oh at the time. One of the decks just disappeared.
What?
Gone, just vanished into thin air. And it turns out later, we finally got to see camera footage after the tournament was over, and it turns out someone just walked by, the competitor just grabbed his whole deck box and deck bag and put it in a garbage can that was 5 feet.
He didn't even steal it. He just threw it away.
Didn't just was mad at that guy and didn't think he deserved to win or whatever, and just whoop, gone. We had no idea.
Oh my!
Absolutely no clue. But then we, so and what do you do? Like a deck disappears. Like obviously that person loses, but like. I don't want non-gameplay things to decide the results of a tournament. And so, there's definitely some risk involved in taking possession of decks, and we put security measures in place for all that. But overall, it turned out to be the better system. And then publishing the deck list was also kind of, I think, a difference between us and Europe. And this is part of where the rules come into play. Because the rules actually say you're supposed to submit your deck list either via Melee or on paper. But you could never actually submit deck lists via Melee the whole time that the system was. So we were like, okay, well, we're just deviating all the time. So we took them into Google form, which wasn't perfect either. I actually worked with Dreamborn to create a system of deck lists and whatever. But it was important, to publish the deck lists as soon as we could the night before. And honestly, I could tell you the deck checks team worked way overtime, and I was right there with them helping to do this. But it was an enormous time and effort. Investment to do that, but I thought it was really important for transparency and fairness to have that, and then have the deck list available as each competitor is playing as well, and they exchange and review and so forth. So that was all of that is to say we wanted to create a high integrity, very controlled environment so that the competitors in the top cut could feel like their gameplay was the first and foremost thing that would decide how they did in the tournament.
Zan, how'd they do? Did you feel like that was true?
Yeah, I mean, they nailed it. And when I was in top 4 in Atlanta, we were playing in this back area, and that was an interesting environment. And I felt like, by the time we got to Vegas, we were on stage, and that was just and with the crowd, it was just it was surreal.
I wanted to touch on one thing you said in your response, which was subtle. It was quick, but you said that you wanted to get to the elimination rounds as soon as possible to sort of get out of the best of 2 environment.
Right.
Again, I don't want this podcast to be really about best of 2 or talk about best of 2 that much, because I feel like it's just been done to death, even on this podcast.
Sure.
But so if we're looking to the future, moving forward, let's say you're just 100% in charge, would you just default to going back to best of 3, or what would you do for Disney Lorcana?
I think the biggest problem that was exposed by the I'm going to keep calling it 2-game format. I'm not going to say best of 2. 2-game format.
My fault. I should say 2 games.
It's okay. So the big thing that became the kind of existential threat to me is that you had this ballooning problem of collusion, gentlemen's agreements. Just for the viewers who don't understand, is essentially this undercurrent and underground kind of agreement, which I guess players don't really talk about, but nonetheless is very obvious that exists, where they agree to play kind of a best of 1, so it's either one player gets 2-0 or the other player gets 2-0. They agree to kind of avoid the split, because essentially you're leaving a point of value on the table, and no one wins if you split. You're just basically each losing against other people who might go 2-0 or 0-2. So there's become this, and the idea is that the expected value over 9 rounds is far higher than if you didn't have that. And so there's essentially a cartel of you guys. And the reason why we know that that's happening in an increasing way is because because I am a weirdo like this, I look at the data after each tournament and I see that the incidence of a player winning 2-0 or losing 0-2 went up probably a steady 8% every single tournament from Atlanta to Seattle. And maybe that's just a coincidence, and players are just happening to get far either better or worse at the game. But you know, I don't believe in coincidences. Call me superstitious.
Yeah.
So I have to think that there's some sort of external factor affecting those results and that data. And it also turns out that men are actually increasingly more likely to go 2-0 or 0-2 than women are. They are, you know, it was about maybe 5% more likely in Atlanta. By the time we got to Seattle, it was about 20% more likely to go. So perhaps that's a coincidence too, but I don't believe in coincidences, so I'm left to try to find another explanation. And that's really the existential threat. Like this pantomiming and like these you know undercurrent under the table agreements, none of that's good for the game. I think there's gonna have to be some sort of change on that. I'm not sure exactly what it'll be. I think that the best solution I've seen in the whole space is something I saw in Japan actually years ago, and they do this in China now, is best of 3 but asynchronous. So in other words, like matchmaking, continuous, no like round timer, like individual game and match timers, but no like everyone plays at the same time, everyone plays at different times, you kind of get matched and then you go play.
Yep.
By a system.
Nice.
That's the idea, is a best of 3 asynchronous. Now there's a bunch of things you have to, and it comes from Japan because it comes from fighting games, where the limitation was actually the availability of the game machine where you had to play. You know, Tekken or Street Fighter or whatever, the limitation of the tournament size was how many of those machines you had. So the idea of never having those machines be idle came into this whole asynchronous thing, like matchmaking would be. So you need obviously a system to do that. You need kind of controls in place so that, you know, decks that take a long time aren't just playing each other, and decks that are quick to play aren't all playing each other. So there's some kind of control mechanisms there. And so that people can't just like batch up and only play against each other and potentially like, you know, astroturf their way to getting a top cut. So a bunch of things that you would need to have in place. But there are very promising systems for it. And I think that is a better long-term solution for TCGs in general. And I think that it's going to be better for this game in particular. Overall, and I also think that that will help paper TCGs kind of compete with video games and digital TCGs that are similar, so that a lot of the inherent systemic downsides of paper TCGs are mitigated by a system like that.
It's extremely interesting. It reminds me of the first thing that I ever paid attention to that you said, which is that once you sit down and you're across from your opponent, just like start playing. And I was like, yeah, definitely. Zan, you know, asynchronous matchmaking, what do you think?
Oh, I love it. I played in a asynchronous tournament and I actually won it. I'm trying to remember if it was 2,000 people or 1,000 something people. It was online. It was with a Magic streamer named Jeff Hoogland.
Oh yeah.
And he hosted this asynchronous tournament, and my experience was incredible. Basically, the thing about it was the moment you got your second loss, you were eliminated. So we made it to like 7. We ended up making it to 7 people, and basically the first place person ended up getting like a double bye situation. And then I played against him in the finals. I had 1 loss, he had 0. So I ended up playing against him in the finals. I beat him the first time, and then we had to play a second time, and I beat him the second time. But I felt like everybody that was playing in the tournament and then eventually became a watcher of the tournament because they got their second loss. And yeah, it was definitely the smoothest. I remember we started at like 10, and we were done by like 6 o'clock, the entire tournament, top cut, everything. And I was like, wow, if every tournament was like this, like it would be incredible.
Yeah, you could potentially have different kind of flights or heats. You know, you could potentially have like, okay, here's the main one, and like the top, you know, 48 of those go to Top Cut, and then we host like a second chance one, and we hold 16 slots for like those people, and it's only the top 16 out of 800 or something.
Yeah.
Like maybe you do it like that. I don't know. Like there's definitely some experimentation to be done, but like clearly the general like, you know, traditional system of tournaments is inefficient.
Yeah.
And I think there's a better way to do it. And honestly, that will help on space requirements. It'll allow us to expand beyond like what is viewed as the traditional 2048 realistic cap.
Yeah.
And there's just 100 reasons why it could be better. And you could have better programming on side events and the sides, and get people involved in other things. I just think there's way too much potential for innovation. And I would like to see a lot more exploration of that rather than like, oh, what do other TCGs do?
When you say potential for innovation and exploration of that, really what we're talking about is we have an opportunity with Disney Lorcana, right? We sort of started on a blank slate. And I like your philosophy of like, we don't have to do it exactly the way other TCGs do it, right? We can sort of build Disney Lorcana and what makes it specific. And so I guess I wanted to talk about your vision for that. And wrapping it into and this is going to be the introduction of like this concept is you have submitted a proposal for a judge program within Disney Lorcana.
Yeah.
Does that sort of align with your vision of making Lorcana it's like a unique TCG experience or a unique community?
See, there's a really practical answer to that, which is the biggest need is for there to be more events at a higher frequency. There just needs to be more of these organized events. And the very practical limiting factor for that is that there are not enough judges to staff a larger slate of events. If you want to have more events, you're going to need a pipeline to quickly train and qualify judges to work those events, not to mention some incentive for anyone to do that in the first place. There's going to need to be staff overseeing and managing these events. One of the things that I did in preparation for, writing or helping to write the judge proposal or judge program proposal is we studied, and even in my judge manual, we did this, I did this. I studied officials and referees and umpires and TCG judges across the whole spectrum. One of the most interesting cases I saw was the 2012 NFL referee lockout. And I don't know if you remember this, but it was basically a strike by the NFL referees, and maybe our viewers aren't super versed on NFL, but basically they all walked out, and then the NFL tried to replace them with college, like Division III and whatever else, high school refs. And it was a total disaster. I mean, they got things wrong, they got things, But the interesting part of that is what the players said about it, that the biggest thing that was missing, and the biggest thing the NFL refs had that the other refs didn't, and the thing that they really couldn't fix is game management. It's the fact that the NFL refs knew how to keep the game moving, keep the game managed, and had it managed effectively of moving the ball and getting it in play and substitutions and this and that. They kept the machinery running. And that is very much the important aspect that judges play in TCGs and in Disney Lorcana specifically is they keep the round moving. They handle end of round. They turn it over. They get it going. They get the players playing. They keep, okay, there's an issue. Make a ruling. Continue play. That is an underrated aspect of why all these, because otherwise you would need both judges and some staff members, which we came up with this whole staff concept of Lorcana Organized Play Specialists, LOPS, to be kind of the staff, non-judge staff. But you need a core of people running and managing and moving these events forward so you can have more events and larger events. And if you don't have a pipeline to train, qualify, and deploy those people, you're literally not going to be able to scale your events. I don't care how many venues you have, how many tables you can rent, how many tickets you can sell. If you don't have the staff, then you're not going to be able to do this.
So for Zan and I as players, the idea of a judge program to us is very attractive because it is probably in our minds one of the single best deterrents for like cheaters. If there could be a way that cheaters are tracked across events or whatever, then you could potentially get them banned or whatever. So I just wanted to say that from us and almost from everybody I talked to, there is no pushback in that there is a need for a judge program. Like that in my mind is not like a controversial stance. So there's a need for a judge program. Have you found that to be the case on your end? Like nobody's pushing back on this, are they?
Yeah. So people will often say like, is anyone against the judge program? Pretty sure everyone agrees. And then the conversation ends there. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is that we've been hearing about a judge program, it's coming soon, since August of 2023, literally when the game came out. And it hasn't come out yet. So the whole purpose of us putting out this proposal and getting community support on it, and by the way, it's like enormously supported on the official Discord where we put it, So it's got like just overwhelming feedback. The whole purpose of us doing that is to demonstrate to Ravensburger that this is a priority to the community, and to get the community to understand that, like, hey, you're not going to have a larger organized play program with more tickets available and more events until and unless this happens. And you're not going to have high quality judges until there are incentives to attract and retain those judges and keep them involved. And then there's not going to be public confidence in those judges until there's standards that they have to meet. So all of those things are just to bring all that to the forefront. But no one's like, oh, I don't want a judge program. It's just they haven't prioritized it. And that's kind of the same thing, because at this point we're, a year and a half later, almost, 2 years, and clearly it's not a priority because it hasn't happened yet. And the worst part is people have all these misconceptions of why it hasn't happened. They're like, oh, because of the lawsuits that happened with Magic judges. And it's amazing to me that like 0% of the people who say that have actually read any of the like rulings. They just read the initial headlines when it came out first. But, several of our judges are lawyers, and we had them, 3 of them in particular, do a deep dive and publish like a legal research memo on those cases and how much they matter. All those judges lost. They got obliterated in those things. Wizards won those handily. The cases were essentially meritless. The court said, this is like a voluntary certification program that you participated in. You're judging as a 1099 contract employee of the tournament organizer, not Wizards of the Coast. Wizards of the Coast is only hiring certain judges for key premier events on a very limited basis. For the most part, judges are working for tournament organizers. So this isn't a class action, and you're not employees. Like, you're just like a mechanic that works for a auto garage that then decides to go get certified in how to fix Hondas or something. And you become more valuable as a result. Like, you're not an employee of Honda as a result of that.
Right.
It's a similar concept. And so volunteer firefighters, we went all the way down this rabbit hole. So we tried to give a proposal, and we can go through any of the aspects of it that you think are interesting, but we tried to give a proposal to Ravensburger that avoided all these pitfalls that would keep it from being implemented, and tried to silver platter it honestly as much as we could. I can't imagine, we spent the equivalent of months of man hours on this from very, very good people in each aspect. And we tried to resolve and address every single one of their priorities and concerns that honestly no one ever gave us directly. But, undercurrent and word on the street, we were able to get as much as we could and give them something that they could just like sign it, fund it, and go.
So, in defense of people, there's this like phrase that's pretty like relevant in the American social system right now, which is that if you don't know how anything works, everything seems like a conspiracy. So a lot of people, they just see the word lawsuit and they're like, I know what the answer is. It's the lawsuit. And they don't really deep dive into that anymore. I wanted to give you an opportunity to sort of, because not everybody has read the document, to sort of talk about some of the aspects of the judge proposal system. I'm largely in agreement with all of the parts of that system, but there are some that I think are really interesting. So one that you have on there is an apprenticeship program for judges trying to get into the higher levels. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about what the levels are, what that apprenticeship program is, and just kind of almost sell me on it so that you have an opportunity to do that here.
Yeah, so we thought apprenticeship and practical experience was really important. First of all, to kind of, share the practice and create a pipeline of someone getting experience enough to actually work these events in person. There's this phenomenon on the internet where people go online and they talk about things they have absolutely no idea about. It's a fascinating thing. But, we wanted to kind of draw a distinction between people who just sit on Discord or Facebook groups or Reddit or Twitter or whatever and just answer like rules questions and do the, well, actually, like that kind of thing, versus the people who are at events having to make sure that the event happens, having to deal with really messy real world scenarios and actually resolve these things in real life. Because we'll often, we're dealing with things at events, and then we'll hear after the fact inevitably, oh, this happened, and this judge said this, and this judge never has a name somehow, even though like everyone has name tags. So, the judge never has a name. It's always anonymous. There's never a specific like, oh, what did the person look like? What was the photo? Nothing, no identifying thing. So it's always just judge. And they did this, and of course it's wrong. And so you're left with like just this random tidbit that you can't really do anything about. Hey, that's not right. Should be this, but whatever. No way to really fix it. So we wanted to have this kind of professional apprenticeship aspect that not only gets people the real world experience to actually move them up in terms of being able to run these events, but also requires the ones with experience to help the next generation and the next group to learn from their experiences and become more proficient as a result.
It makes a lot of sense. There, I think, are two aspects of the judge program that, as like a player, I'm really interested in, that I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to. And they might be like some of the like harder parts to talk about. So number one, and I know Zan is also super passionate about this, it's going to be like how your judge program as implemented wants to address cheating, how much of a concern it is for you guys, and what the infrastructure would be to address cheating. And then number two, what your process for like potentially identifying like problem judges would be, and that.
Yeah, those are great questions. So in terms of the cheating thing, cheating is not like a one-stop shop of how to deal with it. You want a lot of different things. So the most important thing that you can do to prevent and address cheating is to have a group of experienced judges who are kind of the same ones all the time, who get used to their player pool and understand what they're dealing with. And honestly become very familiar with the play patterns of professional play, so that when someone is outside of those patterns, they can identify it and address it accordingly. And also so that they're familiar enough with the lines of play to be able to tell the difference between something that could be accidental or something that could be intentional. So basically, the purpose of a judge program in terms of preventing cheating is to get judges proficient enough and sharing knowledge enough to where situations like that become extraordinarily obvious, versus a judge that is relatively new, comes from a different game, doesn't even know what would be out of the ordinary if they saw it.
Right.
And wouldn't have the experience or expertise to do it, much less the confidence to actually pull the trigger on it, because this is their first Lorcana tournament or whatever. So all of that is there. And then, of course, the overtime aspect of being able to share, best practices and whatever. But even to the point where you're able to, as a judge program and as a judge kind of committee or whatever, pass recommendations up to Ravensburger about changes to the rules over some period of time that can potentially make these situations more acute to address, so that you have the tools to do them. Because right now, you basically have two extremes. You can either give the slap on the wrist warning, or you can DQ. And there's very little really in between that a judge has the ability to do. A judge, this is another thing that I put in my judge manual, and I'm really strict about, a head judge's responsibilities and a judge's responsibilities, because if it's one pet peeve I have, it's judges overstepping their authority. A head judge can deviate from the guidelines that are published, but only in significant and exceptional circumstances. A lot of people say, well, the head judge can do whatever they want. Technically, I guess, but they're bound by the rules too. Mm-hmm. That's where their authority comes from. I've always been really big on that. Mm-hmm. You are stuck with the rules, and you must follow the rules, because that's where your authority derives. And if you disconnect yourself from that, you don't have any authority in the first place. Mm. And so judges who just do whatever they want, I have very little patience with, and they don't last very long, at least with me. So with that said, you have to have a rule set that you can have confidence in, and then you need to stick to it, and then you need to have experience applying it to the game in real life.
So you think that so originally you said that in the document was taken from Magic, right?
Yeah.
And so the one thing that you said about it was everything was toned down.
Yes, they made it more lenient. Yeah.
So are we going to tone it up?
In my opinion, that document needs to be rewritten because it has things that match a game that was designed with completely different mechanics.
I agree.
I don't see any other way around it. And now it's that same document, its shell has been translated into other languages and is being used in other countries. That needs to be overhauled completely rethought from the perspective of this game and what this game's gameplay needs. I don't see any way around that, but that should be done sooner rather than later.
Okay. Do you think let's say they don't take this reversal and they're going to continue to do what they've been doing, do you think that it should be more closer to what it originally was, or do you think that the rules are just fine the way?
Yeah, it's not just about like making it more harsh. It's that
Yeah.
it's a fundamental mismatch. Like the concepts of how things are enforced is disconnected from the way that this game works. Because again, few differences. There's a lot less interaction, almost none, on your opponent's turn.
Yep.
There's no priority passing, so that there are intermediate steps where mistakes would otherwise be caught by either you or your opponent.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a lot more tendency to sequence your moves, and you think out, I'm going to do this and this and this. And then as a result of that, there's a lot more scenarios where your small mistakes then compound into mistakes that are unfixable or that are irreversible.
I completely agree with you. But I feel like it's going to take a second for the adjustment, right? And so I was just asking.
Yeah, like what's the second best option? I wish I had one for you. I really wish I did. Maybe just like take one piece of it and like start with that. Maybe one category of things. I don't know. I already really don't like, this is just my opinion, I don't like the missed trigger thing.
Yep.
I don't like missed triggers and how they're structured at all. First of all, like there's no definition of what makes a trigger missed. I think, did you play in Chicago?
I did play.
Did you make Top Cut in Chicago?
No, I did not.
Okay. So you missed this. In Chicago, I made a very clear announcement at the beginning of Top Cut where I said, and this was a big problem, was like all these shenanigans with Diablo angle shooting.
Yeah.
Where players would like rush through their turn, like the start of their turn, rush through it and be like, no, you missed your Diablo trigger.
Oh.
Because they did a bunch of stuff. And it's like, no. I made it clear. I said,
Yeah.
none of that's going to fly. No pun intended.
Yeah.
I told all of them at the beginning of Top Cut, like, we're going to have zero tolerance for any of that. Like, here's how we're going to rule this.
Yeah.
And the way I ruled it was a trigger is missed when the person whose trigger it is has done anything else rather than put that trigger in the bag to be resolved or pulled the trigger out to be resolved. So writing down a lore, drawing a card, exerting a character, you've done anything, you've missed it.
Yep.
But if you haven't, and your opponent has not clarified whether you've put it in or resolved it or not, then you haven't missed it.
Got it.
And if you want to be super sure as the opponent that like whether they're doing it or not, you're going to need to ask. And we're not just, but that's a fundamental problem in the rules.
Yep.
Is like, I know technically it says that both players are responsible for maintaining a clear game state, by the way. That's what it says, a clear game state. But what does that mean? Like, you have no mechanism to actually penalize anybody for any of that. The missed trigger is basically like, oh, your opponent gets to decide if it goes in, which basically means never does.
Right.
Yeah. So in this new document, would judges have the ability to do the in-between thing, which is give a game loss?
I think there should be a much more kind of escalating aspect of penalties. I have no problem with the things starting out as warnings, but I would like to see escalating scales of penalties. I would like to see things that match actual gameplay and make an individual much more responsible for their effects of their cards and abilities of their cards, so that they're not just like rushing through 4 or 5 things. And if they are, it's to they're taking their own risk, not to just screw up the game.
Yep.
So if you take multiple actions and I have a big problem here with out of order sequencing.
Yep.
In other games, that is less of a big deal. In our game, it could potentially be a really big deal because there are certain times when things happen, and if you are doing things out of order, then it's not clear whether you've missed them or not. Like I'm a big stickler about ready your ink, then draw your card. I'm like obnoxious about it.
Yep.
Because there's other scenarios where that could matter a lot, and it just leaves this ambiguity open. That's why I really liked the original draft of several of the documents, like the community code, where you require honest communication. Like in Lorcana, you can't bluff your opponents.
Yep.
Against the rules. Honest communication is required.
Yep.
So things like that were I thought a great step forward, and then we've slowly but surely taken steps away from that, where now this like point and grunt style of gameplay is acceptable, and I hate that. I think that's a big step backwards. I'd love for us to reverse course and get back to announce things, be clear, say things, talk to your opponent. You're both responsible together to cooperate to run a clear game. I'd love to get back to that.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. So sometimes there are some things that are created by the players in order to solve a problem that's not being solved by the judges, right? And I'll give you an example.
Oh, this is fun. Can't wait to hear
I'll
this.
give you an example.
Yeah.
One is, this was banned for Continentals, which is untapping your ink I mean, unexerting your ink,
Readying.
readying your ink during your opponent's turn. The reason why that became a thing was you wanted to take away the time that your opponent was purposely wasting. Right.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I understand. That's
And how do we get to the bottom of like the slow play that like I started experiencing in set one, right? And so my fix at that time was like, okay, I need to, like, if my opponent is taking 30 minutes and I have to win the game in 20 minutes, like this is the only way I can think of.
Yeah,
to save time.
I got to be honest. I'm so bad at slow play enforcement. I think it's like very difficult to enforce. I think judge training obviously takes a step forward because then you can be a better judge of what is slow play versus what is just deliberate play. Also, I think judge training can get to the point where it can help a judge identify the players and see what is like intentional slowness versus like deliberate slowness. So like, for example, you two actually play very differently. So Jeremy is an inductive player, whereas Zan is a deductive player. So Jeremy plays the way that most people play, which is you kind of figure out generally what you're going to do, and then once you've done it, you kind of figure out what you're going to do. And if you need to sequence things in a certain order, you do that, and you plan that sequence out in advance. But basically, you kind of like wait and see for the next piece of information, and then you continue from there. It's very like, you know, intuitive. Zan does it differently. Zan does deductive. So in Zan's head, he is constantly running scenarios of how am I going to get to winning this game, and he counts backwards from that to determine how he's going to add up all his things to get to doing that. And he's constantly running those calculations to like deduce which of these is the best path forward so that he gets closer to that. Maybe neither of you realize that I noticed these things, but
that's very accurate.
so
I'm freaked out again.
yeah, I mean, when you're a judge and you're like going to judge a high level event, you look and you see what kind of players you have and you factor that in. So I try to judge slow play proactively. So I try to identify, first of all, scenarios where I'm pretty sure slow play would be to a player's advantage if they did it, and just sit there and wait for them to do it and see if they do it. And if they don't do it when they have the first like realistically advantageous opportunity, then I can like relax a little bit and be like, okay, they didn't take it. But all of this stuff is like, if I'm taking a random store employee and putting them, here's how Lorcana generally works, here's the quick play guide, good luck. They're going to have all they can handle just to figure out how the rules work and applying the play correction guidelines. They're not going to get into the deeper stuff of like, how do I make sure this is a fair match proactively? Because as an opponent, you have no idea whether they're considering like real options in their hand or not, and what's possible in their deck, and like, you have no idea. So it's really hard to call slow play or report slow play to a judge, and much harder even still for them to enforce it.
It's extremely difficult. And you know, you said something earlier like you don't think that people like set out to be cheating, and I agree with that. Basically, I think that most people are opportunistic. Like,
yeah,
if
that's
the opportunity presents it, then they have to make the choice consciously. And sometimes you see it happen right in front of you. So the slow play one happens quite often. Usually, I'm gonna talk through the scenario. My opponent is very nice, right? They
do the misdirection thing.
Yeah, they like love me, and then they're winning. They win game one.
Yeah.
And then in game two things start to slip.
Oh yeah.
And I start to win, and then they start seeing the writing on the wall that I'm gonna win this match, and out of spite, I literally watched them make the decision. But you know, one time I had a question with the judge. It's like a discussion with the judge about this situation.
Yeah.
And the judge is like, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Because they're still making the decision going into game three.
Yeah, so this is exactly one of the reasons why we need a judge program. And this is the thing that kind of scared me into like being like, we need to do this right now, and like we need to put this out right now and get the public kind of pressure on it.
Yep.
I'm seeing an erosion in people's willingness even to call a judge at all. Whereas before people would call a judge and like whatever, it would happen. Now there's this initial kind of calculus that people go through of, is this even worth calling a judge in the first place? Like, should I even call a judge for this? And that is scary to me, and it's a sad truth. Instead of them being able to rely on, if I call a judge, here's what's going to happen, I can reasonably believe this is how it's going to go. Now there's that initial like, well, why should I even bother?
Yeah, and I am actively seeing it in my own situations, because in the month of March, I played a tournament every single weekend. Went on like a mini tour, and one of the tournaments you were there, and I called a judge during that tournament. But every other tournament, I was unless I was completely forced to, I didn't want to call the judge because I'm like they can't do anything about it. And so unless it was like a cheating situation, I was like, I don't want to call a judge. But when you were there at SSG, I called the judge for slow play, and like it was like a hard resolution, and it was hard to. But my opponent was 100% slow playing me, and it was out of spite. And I was like, you like, you know, he even verified it. The situation was like, I was like, you know, we have this much time. We both need to play faster. And his response was like, I'm allowed to take as long as I want. I'm like, no, you're not. That's the definition of cheating.
Yeah, you're not actually.
Yeah, see that's so. It's really hard as a judge, like, to avoid getting weaponized. There was actually a scenario in that same tournament. I don't know if you remember this. This is really interesting. So there was a tournament you played. I think it was a Tamatoa, and your opponent called judge, and said, "Hey, judge, you know, I'm not accusing Zan of anything, but this, I think that's like the 5th one I've seen, you know."
Oh.
And I mean, because I'm always cautious of every single judge call. I always handle them the same way because it's so easy to act too quickly, and do something that either tips the scales of the game or gives hidden information or whatever. It's like, because he started that call with, "Hey, can you just check this and do that?" I'm like, no. Tell me what happened. Let's go from there. Like, you're not going to tell me how to resolve this, you know? But a lot of judges will just be like, okay, I'm answering a question. I'm just going to do what he says, and then it's over. No, because I'm not going to, like, check one spot, tell him if he has a Tamatoa, and then that gives him more information, and then no. I'm going to go through every single zone now, and then I'm going to decide if there's a violation. And if there isn't, I'm not going to explain why. I'm just going to say, no, there's no violation. And I'm going to continue and issue a time extension.
Yeah.
There I go.
I'll tell you what was going through my head. In that spot, this was it was a whole misdirection situation. He sat down, was like, I'm a huge fan. I love your content, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Just gassed me up. You know, won game 1. I'm winning game 2. We're going to game 3. I'm winning game 3. And he's literally looking for any judge
Hail
call
Marys, yeah.
He just starts Hail Marying. And every single card he revealed off of Daisy Duck. Like, I showed it to him. I, like, handed it over to him. I'm like, this is Baby Tamatoa. This is Big Tamatoa. Baby Tamatoa. Everything I was super clear about. So when he did that, I was like, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I was like so caught off guard. And so when you came over, I was like, this person is like. And then afterwards, he's just apologizing profusely. He's like, I didn't think you were cheating against me.
Yeah, he got the wrong one that day. He got the wrong judge that day.
I was like, what are you doing?
Well, it's interesting to imagine that Zan doesn't know that he's under a microscope and be like, he probably is playing 5 Tamatoas. It's like, are you crazy? Do you know, like, what Zan?
Well, we all counted them out. You know what I mean? I was counting them out. I was like, okay, yeah, now, like, this is how many I have. And he was like, no, I haven't been counting at all, but I just want to.
But the point is that it should be an expectation that a judge being called at any kind of event, especially a high-level competitive event or whatever, has a certain level of expertise, and that you can rely on generally the same thing from all judges that you call. And I would even like to see a lot more continuity between, like, store-level events and premier level events. Currently, they're completely disconnected. You know, for some sets, the mat and the card is enough, but I would like to see a whole kind of farm system of, like, people going from these, you know, small level tournaments and to a higher level tournament. Maybe, you know, they win a qualification, they win a ticket to be able to go, or we reserve some number. But, like, until you have some sort of uniformity across these systems that you can even believe that these events are even happening in the first place, there's no way to do something like that. And until then, there's going to be this inherent unfairness of, like, you know, people are going to just first come, first serve ticket. You're not going to be able to, like, take each store in Kansas gets to send one to like the regional. I don't know. I thought that'd be really cool.
I completely agree. I 100% believe that we can't do this without a judge program.
So let's talk about, we're coming up pretty soon to the end, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about the path to implementation here, because you're a guy with a lot of sort of, I guess you would say, like, professional experience for big organizations. And so I was going to ask you, how do you envision? Do you have like a timeline you envision for Ravensburger accepting this or denying it? And then where do you think the barriers are? I'm asking, basically, why don't we have it right now? And what's the path to getting it?
You know what? Honestly, a lot of like communities and countries aren't waiting. Like the French just did it. They just launched an unofficial judge program. You know, the Italians too. They launched this whole lore league. They have a whole organized play thing that is a farm system from their stores, and they have tours and they have a whole schedule. Like they just launched it. They're like, I'm not waiting for any, whatever.
Sure.
So it's so Italian, so French. I love it. The Germans are close. The Germans are like split probably 75% for it, 20. They're probably going to be next. But for the rest of us, us, the Americans, the Brits, the Chinese, Japanese, and to some extent Oceania, although, who knows what they do. We're just kind of at the point where it's like, we're going to wait and see. So, our initiative was, we're going to put this proposal forward. We're going to see what happens. There's, no answer from Ravensburger so far, but honestly, I've never done any of this for them. If I was doing it for them, I would have quit months ago.
Sure.
I do this for the community. So, and I've done pretty much as I know how to do at this point. I retired from, being the TO and head judge and actively working on these events at the end of the DLC season. And thank God, because I would have gotten fired at Continentals for sure on the spot.
Why do you say that?
Oh, I would not have sprung like rules changes on the players during the player meeting. I would have refused to do that, I guess, and I just probably would have gotten like thrown out and sacked like right there.
That was a hostile judge environment.
Yeah, I'm really glad I was not. I'm really glad I wasn't there, because I definitely would have gotten fired. And also like the stuff with the shirts, like I would have just not stood for things, and so I probably would have gotten tossed out. The idea that like you're going to ban intentional draws and you're going to force players to like pantomime their game and go through these charades is absurd. And even if you were going to do that, there's literally no excuse for not telling them that in advance. Like there's zero reason why that could not have been an email a week before. I springing rules changes on players at the player meeting, like they deserve to make decisions about what decks they're playing or whatever else based on the rules, and changing them like on that, completely unpalatable to me.
Not something you would have stood for, I think, is a great
and I wish that there was like some reward for that. There isn't. It's just the right thing to do, but it tends, that type of thing doesn't tend to be rewarded. It's probably why there's like 0% chance I'll be anywhere near Worlds, because I'm just not the type of judge that they would want anywhere close to it. They're going to have some insider, someone with like very little, probably, Lorcana tournament head judge experience that is nonetheless completely under their control and will do whatever they say that ends up judging it. And I hope that works out okay. But,
I'm an optimistic guy. It doesn't have to be. It could be that Ravensburger has like a corporate outing day where they all watch this podcast and they decide that there's a better way to go forward.
Oh my God. Well, the thing is, it's just, to them, it's probably not worth the risk. I might do exactly the same thing. I might, all they care about is appeasing the Disney overlord and getting themselves close to them. They've had an enormous amount of success on everything else other than like their direct. And honestly, even the DLC season turned out to be a success.
I agree.
Because they got great tournament organizer partners who salvaged it for them. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah.
That was the reason why it was successful, and for no other reason. But they made it an amazing game. Yeah. They got Disney to say that 2025 is the year of TCGs for Disney. They got Disney to say that. That's a huge victory.
Yeah. Right.
They've got everyone to care about their game, which is more than what 99% of TCGs do. They deserve a ton of credit, all the credit in the world. So who am I to say, whatever? Maybe it's worth it to them just take a zero risk approach, and they just have a judge staff that's worse, for Worlds.
I mean, I think that it was a success, but it's a very slippery slope, and I really do think that people like yourself, enthusiastic, supporting the game, are vital to continue that success, right? Not everybody's going to just continue to be a martyr and just, sacrifice to try to make the season good. Season 2, I really do believe that we need a judge program in place before Season 2 happens.
Oof.
In order for it to be a success, right? Like, there was a level of this that we all said, this is year 1. And we're willing to accept anything bad that happened and brush it under the rug because we believe that much in the game. In Season 2, people will be so much more critical.
Yeah,
and we need this judge program to be... I mean, this is... If the community doesn't come behind this, then I'm telling you, like, I really believe that season 2 will not be as great as season 1.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I'm going to be going to live abroad for work for a year or two. I'll be a fan. I'll be a spectator. At this point, I've contributed about as much as I can contribute. There are some amazing people, taking the baton and running with it and doing as much as they can. The community is stepping up in the meantime, from stores to people doing online leagues and so forth. I've tried to set as much of the source material and the examples of where I think this can go as I can. Now is the time to pass the torch. I really, truly hope and pray for the success of the game. I think it can and will be successful. And I'm really hoping that the work that was done in this first season doesn't go to waste. I accepted a long time ago that my antagonism is going to kind of preclude my involvement in an official way from now on. But if the only thing that I accomplished is to just lay my body on the barbed wire so that other people can go through uninhibited, I will accept that, and I'll consider that a huge victory, and I'll leave proud of that.
Phenomenal. I think that brings us to the end of the interview. I almost said, like, is there anything you want to say as a final statement? But I don't think that we can do better than that. So thanks so much for watching the episode. If you want to make any clips, put it out. There's a part of this episode that was really important to you and you want to clip it, we totally encourage you to do that. We want you to have a good time with this video and share it with your friends and anybody you know. So feel free to clip this video. This has been another episode of the Club Lorcana podcast. I'm Jeremy Bertaglioni.
Syed.
Albert Berdellans.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.